Today, we're diving into a book that makes a striking claim about the subtle shifts happening in our culture. It's called Erasing Jesus: How Secularism is Seducing a Generation by Elena Marcelli, published by Christian Voices Publications. Alex, the book's cover alone, with its image of a crumbling Christ statue, really sets the tone, doesn't it?
It absolutely does, Chloe. The cover art is incredibly powerful because it visually represents the book's central argument. It's not about outright attack or persecution. The statue isn't being shattered or stormed. It's simply eroding into dust. Behind it, St. Peter's Dome fades into a modern skyline. The message is clear. Christ isn't being destroyed. We're allowing him to disappear through a quieter process, which the book calls seduction, not persecution. There was a time when you could say the name Jesus in public without apology, but now we are letting him disappear.
That's a really important distinction. The book frames this as the eternal battle, good versus evil, Satan versus Christ, grounded in scripture rather than sociology. How does it connect this contemporary erosion to something as ancient as Genesis 3? So it's about subtle persuasion rather than direct confrontation. And a key part of that, according to the book, is how we define our terms. What are its core definitions for secularism and relativism, and how do they clash with traditional Christian teachings?
The book insists on precision. It defines secularism not just as the separation of church and state, but as the relocation of moral authority from God to human consensus. Relativism, then, is the belief that truth isn't fixed, but rather morality adapts to culture, emotion, identity, or personal preference. When these merge, the conflict with Christ's claims becomes stark. Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life," but relativism counters with, "There are many ways, many truths." These statements can't peacefully coexist. One claims absolutes, the other dissolves them. The book posits that young people aren't leaving Christ because someone disproved him, but because they've been convinced that exclusivity is cruelty. That's the seduction.
That's a powerful argument, and part of this drift, the book suggests, is fueled by widespread religious illiteracy. I found it quite shocking to read that many young adults don't even know Jesus was Jewish. How does the book suggest this lack of historical understanding impacts faith?
It's a critical point. Many simply don't understand covenant history, the Hebrew scriptures, or that Christianity isn't detached from history. The book restores this foundation, reminding us that Jesus taught within Second Temple Judaism. The apostles were Jewish, and the New Testament is anchored in the Old. When you remove that historical grounding, Christianity risks becoming myth, easy to dismiss. Restore it, and Christianity becomes a historical claim, which is a significant distinction. Faith without history is vulnerable.
It also argues that the real divide isn't between different religions, but something much deeper. What is that civilizational fault line?
The book suggests that while major faith traditions share a common moral architecture, justice, compassion, accountability, moral law, the fundamental divide is whether morality is anchored beyond the human self or authored by the human self. When society shifts from God defines good to I define good, the center moves and instability inevitably follows. It's about the source of authority for our moral framework.
And this shift isn't just philosophical, it's manifesting in our language. The book highlights how terms change, quietly erasing meaning. Can you give some examples of this erasure by language?
Certainly. The book points out the shift from BC and AD to BCE and CE, where the calendar still revolves around Christ's birth, but his name disappears. Christmas becomes holiday season. Faith becomes spirituality. Sin becomes personal choice. Authority becomes opinion. And truth becomes narrative. These are not trivial changes. No one is tearing down statues, they are renaming them. And when you rename something long enough, the memory connected to it fades. It's a form of cultural analysis, not conspiracy thinking, and it shows how even our common words contribute to this erosion.
It's interesting that the book covers controversial topics, but claims to do so with compassion and intelligence rather than anger or condemnation. How does it navigate subjects like abortion or gender while remaining a book of conviction?
That's a distinguishing characteristic. It doesn't scream or posture. Instead, it maintains a clear focus on the message that Jesus forgives, Jesus restores, and every person is a child of God. The book holds firmly to its convictions without resorting to outrage, which sets it apart in today's often polarized discussions.
This leads to what the book calls the Sunday school divide, that cognitive dissonance between what one might learn in church and what one encounters in the broader culture. How does the book help explain that tension?
It gives language to that tension. Many who grew up learning that truth, sin, and grace are real and Jesus is Lord later enter universities or corporations where they're told truth is subjective, morality evolves, and certainty is arrogance. This creates profound dissonance. The book explains how philosophical currents developing over centuries have led to this current moral confusion. It shows that what feels like a sudden shift has actually been developing for generations, providing context for the feeling that one's childhood faith might be perceived as naive by the wider culture.
So ultimately, it's not a loud rebellion, but a quiet drift. What does the book suggest as the response to this seduction?
It strongly advises against raging, retreating, or panicking. Instead, it calls for clarity. The book urges readers to define terms, teach children clearly, speak with courage but without cruelty, and embody Christ rather than caricaturing him. It's about refusing to let relativism redefine what Scripture has already defined and defending Jesus with clarity, not volume. The seduction is smooth and persuasive, so the response needs to be equally clear and compelling. This generation is drifting quietly, not rebelling loudly, no bonfires of Bibles, just distraction and subtle messaging.
This book truly serves as a wake-up call, forcing us to consider what replaces Christ if he is removed from the moral center. Is it government, identity politics, consumerism, or self-authored autonomy? Because, as the book reminds us, cultures don't remain morally neutral. Alex, thank you for breaking down the insights from Elena Marcelli's Erasing Jesus, How Secularism is Seducing a Generation.
My pleasure, Chloe. It's a crucial read for understanding the current cultural landscape. The book ends not in fear, but confidence, reminding us that truth can be forgotten, and forgetting is dangerous.
If this discussion resonated with you, consider sharing this episode with someone who might find it equally thought-provoking.